Now on Radio 4, we join Emily Knight for Flight of the Ospreys. This week, we follow the migrating birds on their journey over the sands and cities of North Africa.
The autumn migration is tough for Britain's ospreys. They're heading for the warm waters and rich feeding grounds of West Africa, but as we've seen in this series, they can be blown into the wild Atlantic, attacked by goshawks, or simply distracted by fish-filled rivers and reservoirs en route. For those that make it safely to the coast of southern Spain, there's a challenge ahead: the Mediterranean crossing, from Europe to Africa.
This is the most treacherous part of their journey, but yet it's only 14 kilometres of their massive journey that they're making. These birds are designed for soaring, utilising thermals, which they can only get off the land. As soon as they go over the sea, there are no thermals, so of course these large winged birds are dropping. It must be a really scary moment for them, and sometimes they do ditch into the sea.
We're following the ospreys in the company of the biologist Sacha Dench and her team from Conservation Without Borders. It's the 1st of October, and the team has just arrived in Morocco, keen to learn how we can make the life of the osprey and all other migratory birds a little easier.
The site we had opted to stay on the first night in Morocco was directly the other side of the narrowest point of the strait. So from the balcony you can watch birds arriving from Spain through these really high mountains. And Jebel Musa, I think, means Mountain of Moses. We had a plan to go and visit the Jebel Musa Raptor Rehabilitation Centre that takes in all kinds of birds.
Premier objectif, c'est la réhabilitation des vautours.
Our first objective is the rehabilitation of vultures. Here we are located on a globally important corridor for vulture migration, the Straits of Gibraltar. Every year we find vultures that arrive weakened, either because of the long distances that they fly during migration, north-south or south-north, or for other reasons such as illness. We find vultures poisoned because of uncontrolled discharges.
Rashid Al-Kamlishi of BirdLife Morocco is Sacha's guide to the rehabilitation centre, which does take in injured ospreys but gets most of its business from exhausted vultures.
There are a lot of birds that are found exhausted or injured from doing the crossing. So fishermen reasonably regularly actually have found ospreys in the water, but quite often it's vultures that are trying to make the crossing and relying on thermals, and there just aren't any thermals there.
Oui, c'est vrai. Bon, on a eu plusieurs cas des pêcheurs qui ont trouvé des vautours.
There have been many cases where fishermen have found vultures floating on the water. They've noticed that they're there because of gull attacks. Not always, but in most cases. Sometimes vultures who are migrating for the first time in their lives can't calculate the altitude of their departure flight and they fall into the sea. There's so many cases like this.
Les menaces qu'on trouve ici pesant sur les rapaces en général.
The main threat for raptors in general are electricity lines and the infrastructure and transportation of electricity. We also have wind farms. The worst problem is electrocution. Last year we had a vulture that arrived with a dead foot. The foot was attached, but dead. After a veterinary examination, we knew that the bird had been electrocuted. The level of damage meant that they had to amputate the vulture's foot. We kept the bird to breed in captivity. It serves now as an example for people to understand this environment better and the risks and threats to birds here.
The relationship between birds and fishermen on this coast is complex and fascinating. Some fishermen used to follow the ospreys to find the richest fishing grounds. But when they found them, they didn't just throw a net into the water.
Il faut comprendre que l'historique de la pêche et la dynamique.
You need to realise that dynamite fishing has a long history. Some historical writing talks about this activity existing for over 5 centuries.
5 siècles auparavant.
Nissan Niabani is a biologist and teacher, fascinated by the ospreys that land on his shores.
La pêche à la dynamite, les gens sont en train de faire du biomimétisme.
In dynamite fishing, people use biomimicry. They put themselves at the same height as the ospreys, and their gaze follows that of the osprey, searching for a shoal of fish going past. A second person, at his signal, throws the dynamite, and the impact of the dynamite is enormous because not only do they kill the fish that they collect, but In the process, they destroy everything from small invertebrates to mammals. I believe that the loss of an important species like the Mediterranean monk seal is due to the atrocious use of dynamite.
All of that together, the damage to the seafloor, but also disturbance of the birds, and at particular nesting time, had over the years caused the population to dwindle to next to nothing. He had decided to work with the fishermen to get rid of this, to look at alternative forms of fishing, trying to avoid areas where there might be conflict with the birds was important. They also then looked at the sort of fishing gear they were using to move from stuff which created plastic waste to traditional fishing traps and pots and nets and things made out of organic materials. And there's now an industry developing, and we managed to sit there on the coastline and see 3 ospreys there still fishing. So it's a fabulous story and still easy for the seabirds there, which is great. However, we then went out with one of his friends of many years that he's made through the Dynamite Fishing Project, a fisherman called Kai Kai. He took us out to an evening fish market. Like, there's a vast range there, but they all look very small.
Quand j'étais petit, par exemple, avec d'autres enfants ou d'autres adolescents comme moi.
When I was small, I and young people like me went fishing with a line or by boat. There were many types of fish and birds. Life was beautiful. We only fished close to the coastline and close to the port. Now the boats travel far out to sea to find something to fish. All the local fish have been erased. There were 10 fish processing factories, employing thousands of men and women in the sardine and anchovy industry. All the factories have closed. The last one closed in the 1990s. They closed because there was so little raw material.
Beaucoup ça me fait mal au cœur parce que j'ai vécu des moments
I had some great times when there were stocks of fish. I never thought that we would have this misery, this crisis. Fish is our only resource, our only work. People have lost a great deal, and the area and the town have also lost a great deal.
L'histoire des beaux-arts pêcheurs peut aider à engager les gens.
Oui, le balbuzard, il forme partie du patrimoine naturel.
The osprey, it's part of the heritage of our area. It's the basis for attracting tourists and scientific investigation. These species need to be respected, and they're a great indicator of resources. If we have ospreys, we have fish. When we no longer see the ospreys, we will know there is nothing left, once and for all.
Définitivement.
So we just all got really excited about this huge flock of birds in the distance. They looked like they might be coming towards us, but the flock was behaving really strangely. So we wondered, was it ducks? Was it something else? And then looking at it with binoculars and then again on other lenses, realised it actually wasn't birds at all. What it was an enormous sheet of plastic that was just being blown around in the wind and was basically going to head straight out to sea. So what should have been we hoped was going to be a spectacular experience actually turned out to be quite horrific.
From the Mediterranean crossing points, the ospreys follow the coast of western Morocco, passing through northwest Africa's most densely populated regions, the fast-growing urban centres of Rabat and Casablanca.
Wetlands are disappearing around Morocco at a drastic rate. We had a fantastic guide in Mohammed Hilmi, who's in his late 20s. He's studying birds and bird ecology and has been interested in it since he was young. He lives in Saleh, which is a city next to Rabat. And within Rabat, there was one remaining wetland which was home to a couple of species that were basically found just there. It's also the only freshwater wetland for quite a long distance. And plans appeared to drain the wetland, fill it in, and build a storage facility for produce.
It's going to be basically a market, a huge market where they stock fruits and vegetables and grains. There was a lake on all this area here, and with the very thick freshwater vegetation, which was very important for birds, either for hiding, having a shelter, or for breeding. In fact, there were many rare species that were breeding here. And by rare, I would say that for some of them, there were not more than 20 pairs in all of the country.
Are there other wetlands nearby that they can use instead?
Unfortunately, In this area of Rabat and all the area next to it, there is no freshwater lakes or rivers, because even the rivers, when they constructed the dam, it's become brackish, salty, because the dam stopped the fresh water from coming from the mountains, and now it's practically only marine water that goes all the way up to the dam wall.
Has this made you give up on conservation in Morocco?
Well, it didn't make me want to stop trying to change things, but it's made me very angry, because our future, the future of all of us, depend on this nature and this wildlife.
Morocco's surviving waterways are a vital resource for many species, but there's one particularly distinctive bird that Sacha, along with her camera team of Jason and Charlotte, are keen to catch on film as they drive south towards the Sahara: the northern bald ibis.
It has a bald head, mostly black feathers, quite multicoloured in the right sort of light. But I think they're quite beautiful. Many have seen them as less beautiful because of this bald head. Across Africa, the ibis has been revered as a god in some mythologies, etc. Across Europe, not at all. So it was revered mostly for banquet tables and was eaten in really large numbers. And that's the primary cause behind it disappearing. Also pesticides and other things.
So I'm currently here in Morocco filming the southern bald ibis, which is a very rare bird species, of which there are only 700 left in Morocco, and that is the majority of the wild population.
Camry is a little place that you would not notice. You would drive straight past it on a long desert road, but there is a small stream that goes right out and it feeds out into the coast, and where it's carved a groove through the sand and the sandstone, it opens up into some cliffs.
The birds here actually don't migrate. Some of them are being raised in a breeding program and then being actually taught to migrate, which is quite interesting. The birds here are very, very confident, which is great for us because they're coming close to our cameras, so means we're getting lots of footage. Hopefully we'll see these birds more as they're reintroduced into different areas, such as Europe, where they were once found.
It's a bird that has been persecuted to the level where actually the entire migrating population is now extinct. It's a migration route that they used to fly along with the osprey, and what we're left with is a few tiny populations in a few places that conservationists and people living around these sites are working pretty hard to try and maintain. And the Prince Albert of Monaco has stepped up and put in funding to try and look after this population. But for us, it was a visit as a reminder of what can happen to a population if you don't step in and do something fast enough.
In the next episode of Flight of the Ospreys, the team reach the Sahara Desert and spot the loneliest osprey of them all.
It's in such a remote area that there are actually no roads directly to the coast where she's fishing or inland to this group of bushes. What she is actually perching on is a very large sand mound. She's found a lonely mound and she's making it work.
Flight of the Ospreys was presented by Emily Knight and produced by Alasdair Cross.